How's it going, everybody? This is Top of Drop. I hope you're having a great day. Welcome back to another video. Alright, once again, I'm taking a break from the food challenges here for this video, and hopefully I'll get back to that in another week, but at some point I am eventually going to cut down on those because let's face it, those are not healthy. But I did mention 3 years ago a video that I made about my experience at Burger King, which, continuing the discussion about food, obviously I worked at for a year and a half and I talked a little bit about my experience working at the food court there at the now pretty much defunct Livingston Mall. But again, that was a food court, and so I was really thinking, would it have been better if I had been working at a fully pledged Burger King restaurant instead of a mall food court that I worked at? Well, I'm going to talk about that for this video. I'm going to discuss again a little bit more about my experience from Burger King, and then I'll talk a little bit about why it may or may not be better to work at the fully pledged restaurant Burger King, and whether or not I feel like I would have had a much different experience over there than I would have had at the food court. Again, it was a decent job at first, but ultimately became stressful near the very end, so I'll share a little bit about that and what I think in this video. Now, as I mentioned before, I worked at Burger King at the Livingston Mall from March of 2017 through June of 2018, and obviously I was mainly doing drinks there, but obviously there was a point in time early on in which I was doing the cashier, but ultimately I was just pulled back into doing the drinks, obviously. But again, obviously I was working at the food court there at the Livingston Mall at that time, and obviously, as we all know, there are a whole bunch of other restaurants at that food court, obviously, that we also had to compete against, obviously, like a Popeyes, a Charlie's, Cinnabon, and obviously all those restaurants as well. So obviously it can be packed there at a food court. And like I said before, even on Saturdays and Sundays, which are the days that I worked at most of the time, they were extremely stressful because obviously for those 4 or 5 hour days, I had to deal with a whole bunch of customers. Obviously, you saw a whole bunch of lines featuring all of those customers, and ultimately I really had to go back and forth between, having to do a little bit of the cashier and then most of the time just filling up the drinks for everybody. And obviously I just felt like that, it was really stressful for the most part because you barely even get like any breaks or something like that. And that's why I felt like working at a food court was really stressful. But obviously, like I said before, while there are a bunch of Burger Kings and food courts at the mall, obviously, as I said before, this is a major restaurant chain, and so obviously there are a whole bunch of fully pledged Burger King restaurants around the country, obviously. And like I said before, would the experience have been different if I was working at a fully pledged Burger King restaurant instead of a Burger King at a food court at a local mall? Possibly, and I'll tell you a little bit about why right now. Obviously, like I said before, at food court, obviously, you really have to deal with a whole bunch of those other restaurants at literally a very small radius. Here in a regular restaurant at a fully pledged location, obviously, it's a little bit different, obviously, because most of the time there, obviously the hours are still set the same way at food court restaurants obviously are. However, there really isn't much going on at a fully pledged Burger King restaurant. It's mainly the same functions. However, the only difference there is that there is a drive-through, and ultimately there's their regular usual sit-down, obviously. And the reason why I say that is because unlike in food courts where food places can get packed really quick, here at fully pledged restaurants, sometimes it isn't really that busy. I mean, there's really only about sometimes 10 or 12 people that are ordering at most, and most of the time there's really about 10 or 12 people really doing the cashier or maybe cleaning up around the place and even working on all the fry stations and all that stuff and just making all the food and all that stuff. And maybe there's one person at a drive-thru that's handling all the orders there, obviously. And so obviously, the function between working at a food court and working at a fully pledged restaurant, some of them are obviously the same. Others, though, they may be a little bit different. Now, again, compared to a food court restaurant and a fully pledged Burger King restaurant, obviously it would be a lot different because obviously, like I said before, everything there isn't much competition. Yes, you have your McDonald's restaurant right next to you. There may be a Taco Bell restaurant next to you as well, and then maybe a Wendy's as well. However, unlike in a food court, there are also fully pledged restaurants as well. And so while you're obviously still competing against those, obviously, the good part about this, they obviously have their own parking spots and all that stuff. Here, you don't really have to worry about that. You can just focus entirely on only the customers that are coming in your location. In a food court, you have to worry about whether or not they're going elsewhere around that food court. court to other places that are at that food court. And so yeah, compared to that, I do feel like it would probably be a little bit of a different experience here because like I said before, working at a food court, it was extremely stressful. You know, there were days in which I could barely even have like a minute or two really just, you know, to focus and relax and all that stuff because there was just so many people that were just coming at our location at the food court that literally you just had to really be on your toes non-stop just to make all the drinks for all the customers there and just really just get everything done in a short amount of time. At a fully fledged restaurant, literally it's just go at your own pace style, obviously. Yes, you still gotta get the food done in a quick amount of time, obviously, but at the same time, you know, there isn't really that many people that are really coming around. And so obviously, you know, that is a plus. And again, I feel like that the fact that most fully pushed restaurants have a drive-through, I feel like most customers nowadays, since especially they are now like on the go, like let's say, you know, like heading to work or to a party or something like that, they usually just go through the drive-through to get what they want from Burger King, obviously, and then just take the food with them, obviously. And I feel like that's exactly what happens most of the time at a Burger King restaurant. And so obviously that's exactly why not many customers actually go in the restaurant anymore compared to just going through the drive-through. So obviously it's less of a hassle there, well, unless you're the one managing the drive-through. And ultimately at the very end, you still have to do a lot of cleaning up around the place. Obviously, you gotta clean all the tables, obviously, and then obviously make sure the floors are really squeaky clean, and then just make sure the kitchen is neat, obviously. But there is a lot more space at your area at a fully fledged Burger King restaurant compared to a food court at the mall that you will be working at. And obviously, I feel like that would have been pretty good as well because obviously there's a lot more space to be able to make all your food, obviously, just get everything done. And ultimately, you know, because of that, you can easily clean things up a little bit easier as well. Again, at the place I was working at, it was like very tight because obviously you literally had to squeeze through a whole bunch of people with that small amount of space there. And ultimately, it just made things that much tougher to be able to get everything done. Now, ultimately, when I was trying to find a restaurant during late fall 2016 and ultimately early winter 2017, again, I was only just starting college at the time. So obviously, it was getting real difficult for me to do that. And again, I just left my first job at Stop and Shop because ultimately, I could not continue working there because I relocated from Kennewaw to Springfield, and also because I really hated it there at Stop and Shop. If you want to know about that, go check my video out there. Obviously, I'll leave that in the description below. But ultimately, it was really hard to really be able to find a job. And ultimately, when I did my job interview for Burger King, I basically got it because my dad was a friend for one of the regional managers for the New Jersey chains at Burger King, obviously. And so I felt like that I was really going to really get one of those jobs at the fully fledged restaurants. In fact, I did mine at a fully fledged restaurant that was just nearby in Route 22 and all that stuff. That was not what I ended up in. They put me at the food court location instead, and so obviously that was a little bit of a shame. But ultimately, I do sort of wish that I did end up in a fully fledged restaurant for Burger King instead of a food court mall, because I do feel like that, while it may have been a little bit different, I do feel like it probably would have been a little bit better. I feel like maybe it would have been a little bit easier for me to be able to get everything done, and who knows, maybe I would have been there for an extra year or two while I was continuing my studies in college, because ultimately, like I said before, you combine all of that stuff, and considering what happens at a food court and all of that stuff, obviously isn't that much pressure for you at that store, unless you ultimately get into a manager position or ultimately oversee everything as a real investor or owner of that particular chain of stores. And so ultimately, you don't really need to do that much there. I mean, as long as you're awake, ultimately that's really all you need to do to get by there at that particular restaurant. And ultimately, that's just good enough there for my view. Again, at the food court, it was just stressful. You were having to consistently do everything because there was just so many people that were coming in at your restaurant, especially during the lunch hour. It probably would have been different at a fully fledged Burger King restaurant, in my opinion, because, like I said before, there's barely any people that actually walk into the store to make their orders. Everybody's just going through the drive-thru, and so unless I was actually handling the drive-thru, ultimately, it's not going to be that much different in regards to the functions, but just the environment and potentially the style of being able to do everything, it would have been a lot easier in my opinion. And I just feel like that, in my opinion, it probably would have been a little bit better for me to ultimately end up there than at the food court at the Livingston Mall. But again, I'm not going to say anything negative in regards to everybody that I worked with there at the Burger King at Livingston Mall. Most of the people that I worked with there were pretty good. It was just the environment was extremely stressful during that time, and ultimately, you know, it just made it very hard for me to be able to get by. Now, ultimately, it really depends on exactly what your kind of style is. Ultimately, if you enjoy working at fast food, but ultimately just want to have an easy space just to be able to get everything done without a whole lot of pressure, a fully plush restaurant is probably the best place for you. If you really don't enjoy the fast-paced environment and enjoy getting everything done in a high-pressure situation, then maybe working at a fast food court ultimately will be a lot easier. And while working at a fast food court was probably a little easier at first, it just continued to get stressful for me as time went on. And ultimately, it just became less enjoyable by the time that I left there. And so ultimately, I feel like that it would have been a lot more different and probably a little bit better at a fully plush restaurant, because ultimately, you get to do everything at a quick amount of time, obviously, but also just worry about yourself ultimately, because not a whole lot of customers are going to come in at that fully plush restaurant, and you can just focus on just doing what you have to do just to be able to really get by. Now again, if you want to know my overall experience in regards to working at the Burger King at the food court at Livingston Mall, I'll leave the link to that in the description below. You can check that out, and ultimately it's pretty good viewing as well. But again, if you were to ask me personally, if you were to work at a fast food restaurant, would you prefer to work at the overall restaurant or at a food court mall? If you were considering working at one, I feel like it probably would be better working at an actual fully plush restaurant instead of a food court mall. Largely because of a better environment, ultimately just less stress. Obviously, it's the same functions, but again, it's just not a whole lot of pressure. Food court, like I said before, it's just really hard, and ultimately you're just gonna have to do quite a bit just so that way you look like you're actually being functional to your managers and all that stuff. And one mistake at a food court mall, you're getting yourself thrown out. And I was lucky not to have that happen to me multiple times, but like I said, working at a food court, it was really stressful. So ultimately, it really depends on exactly what your kind of style is. Burger King, like I said before, my experience there, it was overall pretty good, but ultimately it got really stressful near the very end. But again, that was really exactly what I was in for when I was working at the food court, obviously. I had to deal with a whole lot of pressure. Working at a fully plush restaurant though, ultimately it can be a little bit better, especially since nowadays during the fast food industry, everything's just being done on the app or even at the drive-thru ultimately, and not many people really come in nowadays at the restaurant to really make their orders. And so ultimately it just depends on your style. But again, it is still the same exact chain, and ultimately your number one goal is still the same: to make your money so that way you can get by at home and ultimately impress your bosses enough to continue to move up the ranks. Now again, obviously this is probably best served as a job that you would take if you really need the funds to be able to pay for college or stuff, unless you're really not going to be successful in your life at all. So obviously it's really up to you in regards to that, but ultimately, like I said before, fast food restaurant chains, obviously a lot of them have locations at the food courts, but ultimately they are very stressful. So if you're thinking about working at a fast food chain, go working at a fully plush restaurant. I just feel like it will be a lot better there instead of at a food court like I worked at. Trust me, it will make your life a lot easier. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. I'm going to leave it to you guys to go ahead and answer this question here. What do you think? Do you feel like it would have been better working at a food court or at a fully plush restaurant? And if you have worked at a food court or at a restaurant before, or even both of them, what was your experience there? And ultimately, what do you think is the better area of a fast food chain to work at? Let me know down in the comments below. I'll be more interested in hearing your opinions about it. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. As always, if you'd like to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when my latest video is released. Comment below for future suggestions for all my videos, whether it's blogs, projects, or challenges, you name it. Leave it in the comments below and I'll do my best to make them. As always, follow me on my social media. All the links are in the description below. That's going to do it for this video. I hope you're having a great day. And as always, hope to see you all again in another video very soon. So long, everyone.